What's up and welcome to my review of the Asus Zenfone 6. We're taking a look at this $499 beast. At least on paper, the Zenfone 6 is one of the best smartphones out there. It's got the Snapdragon 845. You can get between 6 and 8 gigs of RAM, 64 to 256 gigs of storage, plus it has a micro SD card slot for expandable storage. You've got dual SIM slots, a fingerprint reader on the back, a flip-up 48 megapixel camera with a 13 megapixel wide-angle camera, not to mention the essentially bezel-less, very modern and great design of the device, a Gorilla Glass on the front and back. So obviously this device has lots of great things going for it, but the real question is there a real deal breaker here in actual day-to-day use? Does it have terrible cell phone signal? Is the display bad? Is the camera bad? Maybe the software is bad? We're gonna talk about all of the potential negatives of this device here in today's review, and we're gonna talk about all of the great things that I love about it as well. I've been using this for about a week now as my main phone, and I got to say I'm super impressed. Now, before I get further into this review, I gotta give a big shout out to GearBest.com. They provided the Asus Zenfone 6 that I have in this review. If you've never been to GearBest.com, they offer a ton of different electronics, especially from Asian countries. If you're trying to get a ton of different smartphones or fitness watches or whatever electronic you're looking for, there's a good chance that they have it. If at the end of this review you're looking to pick up a Zenfone 6, just know that there are links down below to help you out. First up, let's talk about the design. Now, this is essentially a bezel-less phone with a small chin. Now, there is some side and top bezel to it, but just enough, in my opinion, that your finger is not going to be accidentally touching the screen all the time. I don't think smartphone manufacturers will be able to make the bezels much smaller than this. Of course, the bottom bezel is about the only area where they could really make some improvement. Actually, holding this device in your hands leaves a really positive impression. It feels a lot like an iPhone XS Max. Honestly, it's about the same size, about the same thickness and weightiness to it. It's got an aluminum frame around the outside with Gorilla Glass on the front and back, so it feels really premium. The buttons feel very good, very snappy and clicky sounding. Now, one of my only complaints when it comes to premium feel for the Zenfone 6 is the vibration motor. It's just not as strong as I've come to expect from a flagship device. It's really not that big of a deal, but like when you're typing, I just expect more little tappy feedback than what you get with the Zenfone 6. Now, the 1080p display is an IPS display and it gets very bright and it's very, very colorful, but I'm used to using an OLED smartphone. The Galaxy Note 10 Plus, the Red Magic 3, the iPhone XS Max, those have been my previous phones, and this display just isn't quite as bright, it's not as contrasty, the blacks don't get as black, and it's just not quite as colorful. But it's like 90% of the way there on all fronts. I can still use this in direct sunlight without a problem. I can read text, I can play games, literally no problem. Honestly, I'd be extremely happy with this display if I wasn't constantly looking at OLED displays when I'm using other phones. So that said, I think the vast majority of other users out there would be very happy with this display as well. Now, the only real gripe I have with the display is that it's not a high refresh rate display. I love 90 Hz and 120 Hz displays. It makes a big difference when you're playing games. It makes a big difference when you're scrolling up and down web pages. It makes using a phone so much better, and it's the future. I just wish this one had a high refresh rate display. And honestly, if there was one reason why I can't say I absolutely love the Zenfone 6, it's that lack of a high refresh rate display. Let's talk performance. This thing has the Snapdragon 855, and my particular Zenfone 6 has 6 gigs of RAM. Now, you can order a more expensive version of the Zenfone 6 that has 8 gigs of RAM and up to 256 gigs of storage. This one only has 64 gigs of storage. Now, I'm not as worried about buying a 64 gig storage device, especially since this one has a micro SD card slot, which makes it very easy and affordable to expand your storage as needed. Now, some of you are going to complain that this thing only has 6 gigs of RAM, and I'm telling you, 6 gigs of RAM is going to be enough for basically everyone. The only real downside is that when you're trying to load maybe multiple games in the memory at the same time, it's not going to be able to handle multiple large, complicated video games being played at once and keeping everything in memory. That's where 8 to 12 gigs of RAM is going to give you a little bit more leeway and run multiple heavy-duty apps at the same time without having to reload them over and over again. Now, the performance on the Zenfone 6 has been extremely snappy. I've been very happy with the day-to-day performance. The only downside is, again, it's not a high refresh rate display, and high refresh rate display phones are basically pre-programmed to run games at higher frame rates. For example, in Pokemon Go, I'm not even getting 60 frames per second. Same thing in the Galaxy Note 10 Plus, S10 Plus. I would say you only get about 30 FPS on those phones, whereas gaming phones with higher refresh rate displays just just are able to put out more frames per second in certain titles. Now, the 5000 mAh battery in this thing is a monster. I've been able to get about 8 hours of screen on time doing lots of intensive heavy duty things like playing with the camera, playing Pokemon Go. Just today, I used it for 5 hours of screen on time with 35% remaining. One of my other days, I didn't really play much games on it, and I basically let it sit there most of the day, only used it for about an hour and a half, and I still had 83% battery when I went to bed that night. This phone, for a lot of people, could be like a 3-day phone. Now, that's gonna vary drastically depending on how much you use your device and what you use your device for. But just know that this has absolutely fantastic battery life, and it's really hard to complain. Now, if there was one complaint, it's that the fast charging on it is maybe not as fast as you would ideally love, especially considering this has a 5000 mAh battery. Now, it only has an 18-watt charging speed, and that is Quick Charge 4.0, but here's the thing, a lot of these large battery phones are going for much faster charging. The Note 10 Plus has a 45-watt charging speed, the OnePlus 7 Pro has a 30-watt charging speed, the ROG Phone 2 has a 30-watt charging speed, and all of those phones have large batteries, but this one has one of the biggest, and it's gonna take an extra bit of time to get it fully topped off. Now, the reason for this is the lithium-ion battery that Asus put into it is basically more compacted down, which prevents those super fast charging speeds, but it allows for additional capacity on the inside. And I would personally rather have a 5000 mAh battery with 18 watts of charging than a 4000 mAh battery with 30 watts of charging. That's just me. I would rather be able to take the phone out there for longer and then bring it back and maybe just wait a few more minutes to get the same level of charge. Now, obviously, another downside is this does not have wireless charging while still having a glass back. In my opinion, if you're not going to have wireless charging, you should just ditch the glass back so you have better durability on the device overall. Now, the main 48 megapixel camera on the back is really impressive. It's right up there with top tier phones. It's so close to the Galaxy devices, to the iPhones out there. The really, really cool thing about it though is that you can flip it around and take selfies with the same level of quality as the back camera. Obviously, the iPhones and Samsungs and Huawei's out there have good front cameras as well. The front cameras on those phones are not nearly as good as the back cameras on those phones. But with this phone, you get the full quality on the front and the back, and I love that. You can take flash photos in selfie mode. You can take slow motion videos in selfie mode. You can use night mode photos in selfie mode. You can use pro mode in selfie mode. There's just so much versatility, so many additional features that you get when you can flip the main camera backwards. I love it.
Oh, it's all hot! Hot!
You thought the iPhone was the first phone that could shoot a Selfie. Heck no, the Zenfone 6 can shoot Selfies at 480 frames per second at 720p HD. Now, the flip-up camera adds some unique special features to this device in particular. First of all, you have a motion tracking feature where you can tap on an object, and as it moves around, it'll try to move the camera left and right to track that object. It's hard for me to see the value in this as being anything other than a gimmick, but it's cool that they included it. I mean, it's a pretty sweet feature to say, yeah, I have motion tracking on my smartphone. But what would you ever use it for? I have no idea. Now, another mode that's really cool is the panoramic mode, which actually utilizes the motor in the flip-up camera to take direct and very accurate, precise panoramic images. No more like trying to balance it and make sure you have a perfect panoramic, just very carefully moving your phone. All you have to do with the Zenfone 6 is hold still and it'll take that panoramic for you automatically. Now, the wide angle camera both impressed me and disappointed me a little bit, and it impressed me especially in video mode. It's very stabilized, it's very smooth, and it delivers a fantastic overall experience, especially when shooting selfie video, because you can see yourself and you can see how it's being framed. This is the ultimate vlogging smartphone. It is seriously an incredible smartphone for anyone who vlogs, even semi-casually or semi-professionally. This has so much versatility and so many applications for the vloggers out there. And now this is the wide angle camera. I'm not even holding it out at full arm's length. That is full arm's length. Kind of overkill, honestly. You can hold it a lot closer than most smartphones and still get a really
good image.
Now, the main area that the wide angle camera disappointed me a little bit is in photos. The wide angle photos were good, but they just weren't great. Like the main sensor on this thing is fantastic for photos and for videos, but the wide angle camera, I just felt like it was a much better overall sensor for videos than it was for taking high detail photos. Now, the really cool thing about the wide angle camera, just in general, is that since you can flip it around, you can take some incredible selfies, like full body selfies if you hold the phone out there all the way. And I've never been able to take a full body selfie with a smartphone before. And I can see so many people using full body selfies for things like events, for weddings, for concerts. It's just so many cool applications out there for this ultra wide selfie camera that's a much better quality than most front ultra wide selfie cameras would have been. So overall, I freaking love the camera on the Zenfone 6. Like, it's arguably my favorite-ish camera on any smartphone, which is a weird thing to say. No, it's not the best quality on any smartphone, but I just love the versatility of flipping it over and taking a selfie with a flash or doing wide angle video in selfie mode. This smartphone is a dream for a YouTuber who wants a versatile secondary camera or B-roll camera that's capable of just doing so much. So a giant thumb up for the cameras for both photos and videos, and for selfie mode. Just a freaking awesome camera on this phone. Now, the software on the Zenfone 6 is essentially stock Android with like a handful of very minor tweaks and changes for like icons, what the app drawer looks like, the camera apps, the phone apps, stuff like that is going to be slightly tweaked and changed from stock Android. But overall, really love the software experience. There's no bloatware. It runs extremely snappy. 2 giant thumbs up. Now, one downside of having the simplistic software is that you don't get the fancy bells and whistles that you do get with something like Samsung. Now, yeah, Samsung phones have lots of bloatware, but they also have things like DeX. Like if you want to be able to use your smartphone as a computer, you can do that with a Samsung. You can't do that with the Zenfone 6, at least not out of the box. Now, as far as special features go, there's this reprogrammable button above the volume button, and by default, it's set to the Google Assistant, which I think is a fantastic choice. But if you don't want to use that, you can set it up to do 3 different functions with a single press, a double press, and a press and hold. You can do things like take a screenshot, turn the flashlight on and off, or summon Google Assistant, or go to Google Home. There's just a lot of versatility with the programmable button, and I love it. Right now, what I have it set to is open camera mode, double press for the flash, and a long press opens Google Assistant, which is just a fantastic and such a functional thing. I love it. More smartphones need to do this, because this is how you do a programmable button. Now, there's also facial unlocking on the Zenfone 6. There's a caveat here. We're talking about a motorized flip-up camera. Now, obviously, the more you use the motor, eventually the sooner it's gonna run out or burn out or break. So I wouldn't really advise using the flip-up camera that often, but you can use it for the occasional time that you can't really reach the fingerprint sensor on the back. Now, the fingerprint sensor worked great like 99% of the time, but for those times maybe you can't reach the fingerprint sensor because you're holding the phone weird, or your finger is wet so the fingerprint sensor just isn't working, you can actually just tap the face recognition icon here and it flips the camera around, boom, and we're in. I love that they added this as a feature that you don't use all the time, but it's available in those special situations where it's a little bit tricky to unlock your device. So let's wrap this up. Overall, the Zenfone 6 does not make many compromises to reach that $499 price tag. So many budget phones just chop major features, or they have a crappy camera, or their screen is just terrible, or their design is sucky. This phone has it all. It's got the performance, it's got the specs, it's got the battery life, it's got the great camera. It's really got it all. The only things that are minor compromises are the fact that it's not an OLED display, it's not a high refresh rate display, and it doesn't have the fastest charging in the world, as well as lacking wireless charging support. But those are very minor compromises and not really deal breakers for very many people. Now, me personally, I value having a high refresh rate display above just about every other smartphone feature out there. So the Zenfone 6 is not going to be in my pocket for that reason alone. And if it had a high refresh rate display, I would be all over this thing. Like, seriously, it'd be my favorite phone on the market. So all that to say, I'm really looking forward to the ROG Phone 2 whenever that comes in, because it probably has the same camera sensors on the back, the same software, the same great photos and video capability, as well as having 120 hertz OLED display. So that like fixes all of my complaints with this phone in particular. So can I recommend the Zenfone 6? Absolutely. This is arguably the best smartphone under $500, unless you really care about a high refresh rate display, in which I would highly recommend the Red Magic 3, which I have also reviewed recently. I actually have it right here. I'm using this as my main phone right now. I've dropped it like 5 times and it's somehow survived, a couple times on concrete even. It's definitely took some damage, but it's still alive. But really loving the Red Magic 3. That's my main daily driver right now. I love the Red Magic 3, but if you're someone who doesn't want a giant phone, you don't like the gamer aesthetic of this one, this is a very modern, very classy, high quality smartphone for only $499, and it's kind of a no-brainer. Like, would you rather spend twice as much for something that has arguably less features? It's tough. The OnePlus 7 Pro, highly recommend that phone. The Zenfone 6, highly recommend that phone. It's so hard to recommend the Galaxy devices and the iPhones of the world right now just because they're so overpriced. The iPhone 11 may be the only exception. I don't know. Love to hear your thoughts on this. Please let me know what you think of this review in the comments down below. Once again, I'd like to remind you of our sponsor, GearBest.com. If you're looking to pick up an Asus Zenfone 6, I'll have a link in the description once again. Now, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, tap the notification bell, and if you enjoyed this video, hit that like button. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Brandon, out.